3:47 p.m. The golden sunlight of late afternoon stretched across the quiet streets of Fairhaven Grove. Everything here looked like it belonged in a catalog. Neatly trimmed lawns, perfect hedges, and homes that seemed copied from the same blueprint of suburban order. The patrol car moved slowly, almost soundless, along the curb. Officer Brent Holloway, newly assigned to the town, was still getting used to how quiet things were. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the radio, eyes scanning. Then he saw him. Elijah Brooks, 16, black, backpack slung over one shoulder, headphones in, walking alone on the sidewalk. Just heading home from Fairhaven High. Holloway didn't know Elijah, didn't know his story, but in that moment, none of that mattered. What Holloway did notice, maybe the only thing he really saw, was the color of Elijah's skin. He slowed the car, pulled over, and rolled the window down. "Hey, kid, hold up a sec." Elijah stopped. He pulled out one earbud, turned calmly toward the voice. His eyes were steady, unreadable. "Yes, sir?" What followed was short. A few questions, a search through his backpack. Nothing unusual, at least not for Elijah. He learned to stay calm, learned to expect it. But then came that moment, the one Holloway would later wish he could take back. "My dad's a federal agent," Elijah said, voice even, like he was just stating the weather. Holloway snorted. "A Fed?" "Yeah, right." He laughed, loud and mocking, the kind that says, "You don't belong in that world, kid." What Holloway didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that this was his first mistake, and the biggest one he would ever make, because in just 3 days, every single person in Fairhaven Grove would know the name Julian Brooks, and no one in that quiet, orderly town would ever look at a black teenager the same way again. Fairhaven Grove sat nearly an hour outside the city, just far enough to feel like its own little world. A town that looked peaceful on the surface, wrapped in rows of flaming red maples each autumn, where white picket fences hugged two-story homes that could have been stamped out from the same suburban mold. The streets were so clean, you could hear your own footsteps echo on the pavement during quiet early mornings. But for Elijah Brooks, 16 years old, this place had never truly felt like home. He'd moved here at age 6 with his mother, Nadine Brooks, a tireless nurse, and his father, Julian Brooks, who was often away on business. Elijah grew used to it being just him and his mom for months at a time. And when his dad returned, it was never for long. A few days maybe, then gone again, like wind slipping through a crack in the door. His dad had always told him, "You need to learn to be quiet, to watch, to be strong without making a sound." His mom liked to joke instead, "You're the only black kid in a class full of blondes. You already stand out. Don't give them a reason to use it against you." Elijah understood, and he learned to make himself invisible in the very town he lived in. Walk light, keep his head down just enough not to draw attention, but not so low as to seem weak. He learned which routes to take, which houses not to glance at, what time to leave school so he wouldn't get caught in the crowded hour, when the eyes came out, always watching. But no matter how careful he was, he could never quite disappear from the cold gaze of Mrs. Vaughn, the elderly neighbor across the street. Every time he walked past her house, the curtain would twitch. She weighed every one of Elijah's footsteps like they were offenses. Then there was Mr. Peterson, the grocery store owner near the school. The man had never once smiled at Elijah, despite seeing him almost daily for drinks and sandwiches after basketball practice. Peterson looked at him like he was a bomb that might go off at any second. And every time Elijah walked into the store, he'd hear the quiet click of the security scanner turning on. He had never stolen a thing. Fairhaven Grove sat nearly an hour outside the city, just far enough to feel separate, like its own quiet world. A place that looked peaceful, with rows of blazing red maple trees every fall, white fences circling identical two-story homes, and streets so clean you could hear your footsteps echo each morning. But to Elijah Brooks, 16 years old, it had never really felt like home. He had grown up here since he was 6, with his mother, Nadine Brooks, a dedicated nurse, and his father, Julian Brooks, who was always away on assignment. Elijah got used to it being just the two of them for months on end. His father would return for a few days, then vanish again, like wind slipping through the cracks. His father always told him, "You need to learn how to be silent, to watch, and to be strong without needing to speak." His mother would joke instead, "You're the only black kid in a classroom full of blonde heads. You already stand out. Don't give them a reason to target you." Elijah understood. He learned how to make himself invisible in the very town he lived in. Walk lightly, keep his head lowered just enough not to draw attention, but not so low that he looked weak. He knew which streets to take, which houses not to look at, what time to leave school so he wouldn't get caught in the busy hour, when eyes always seemed to search for something to judge. Still, no matter how careful he was, Elijah could never avoid the cold eyes of Mrs. Vaughn, the elderly neighbor across the street. Every time he passed her window, the curtain twitched. Every step Elijah took felt like it was weighed, measured. And then there was Mr. Peterson, the grocery store owner near the school. Not once had the man smiled at Elijah, even though the boy came often after basketball practice to buy a bottle of water and a sandwich. Peterson looked at him like he was a bomb that might go off at any moment. Every time Elijah walked in, he heard the click of the security scanner turning on, though he'd never stolen a thing in his life. That afternoon was warm. Elijah had his headphones in and was making his way home after a long, exhausting practice. His backpack was heavy. The music helped dull the soreness. He followed the usual path through the park, then turned down Ashbury Lane, where the old grocery store sat at the corner. As soon as he pushed the door open, there stood Mr. Peterson behind the counter, eyes sharp as ever. Elisha didn't care. He just wanted a cold Gatorade. He grabbed the drink, placed the money on the counter, and gave a nod. Peterson, as always, said nothing. But the moment Elijah stepped outside, he felt a shiver crawl up his spine, a slow crunch of tires behind him. "Hey, kid!" A voice unfamiliar came from behind. Elijah turned. A black Ford Explorer had pulled up to the curb. The window slid down, revealing a stranger's face, stern, unreadable. Officer Brent Holloway. "What are you doing here?" Elijah slipped off his headphones. "Just walking home, sir." "Where?" "Maple Street, 3821. "You got ID?" "I'm 16. I only have my school ID." He reached slowly into his backpack. "Keep your hands where I can see them," the officer shouted, one hand already grazing the holster on his hip. Elijah froze, his arms rising in the air like he was guilty of something, like the weight of suspicion had leapt onto his back. But inside his bag, there was only water, books, and a pair of worn basketball shoes. "Show me what's in the bag, now." Carefully, he unzipped the backpack and pulled everything out, one item at a time. Nothing suspicious, nothing unusual. But Holloway wasn't finished. "Your parents home?" "My mom's working a shift at the hospital. My dad, he's away on assignment." "What kind of assignment lets a kid wander around alone like this?" The officer squinted, sarcasm slicing through his tone. "Let me guess. Deadbeat dad type, huh?" Elijah clenched his jaw tight. "My father works in special operations." He said it calmly, not to impress, not to provoke, just the truth. Holloway burst out laughing. "Special ops? What is this, G.I. Joe? You think I'm buying that crap?" He turned to the other officer who had just arrived, shaking his head with a grin. "Hey, you hear that? Kid says his dad's special forces. Might be Chuck Norris's best buddy for all we know." Elijah didn't flinch. He didn't fire back. He just looked Holloway in the eye, steady, grounded. There was no challenge in his stare, no fear either. Just quiet dignity. Like someone who didn't need to be believed, didn't need to be understood. Because the one person who truly mattered had already prepared him for this. Taught him that silence could be stronger than protest, that stillness could be louder than shouting, and that look, that calm, unshaken presence, was what rattled Holloway most. He didn't realize, not then, not in that moment of mockery and suspicion, that by demanding Elijah prove his innocence simply for the color of his skin, he had just opened the door to a storm this town had never seen coming. Holloway's patrol car was still running, engine rumbling like the irritation bubbling in his chest. Elijah stood in front of the hood, hands still calmly placed across his chest, eyes fixed on the officer. Not defiant, not trembling, just still. The kind of unsettling stillness that made Holloway's skin itch. "Where's your father?" Holloway narrowed his eyes, voice laced with suspicion. "He's away on assignment, sir," Elijah replied, voice steady, polite. "Where exactly?" "I don't know. He works in special operations." There was a beat of silence. Then a dry chuckle escaped Holloway's throat, quickly turning into full-blown laughter that echoed off the quiet street. "Special ops? Really? What is this? G.I. Joe? Kids watch too many action movies." He turned toward the second patrol car that had just pulled up, waving and yelling, "Miller, get over here. You got to hear the week's best joke." Officer Miller, a man in his 40s with tired eyes and a sagging posture, stepped out of the vehicle. He glanced at Elijah, then looked at Holloway, clearly uncomfortable. "What's going on?" "This kid says his dad's special forces. Probably works with Chuck Norris, huh?" Holloway burst out laughing again. But Miller didn't laugh. He looked at Elijah, just looked. His eyes were quiet, calculating. There was something in his gaze that didn't mock, didn't accuse. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then stepped back toward his vehicle, choosing not to join in the performance. Across the street, behind a tree, Amira Johnson held up her phone, a classmate of Elijah's, 16, daughter of a well-known civil rights attorney. She wasn't the type to get involved in other people's business, but this she couldn't ignore. She didn't flinch when the taunt started. She didn't lower the camera when Holloway's gaze swung her way. She just held steady, eyes focused, grip firm. She knew this needed to be documented. Proof mattered. "All right, pack it up, kid." Holloway's voice dripped with disdain. "Get out of this area, and next time, don't wander around like that. Someone like you, people get the wrong idea fast." Elijah bent down and calmly gathered his books and water bottle, packing them back into his bag with deliberate care. No rush, no sign of fluster. He slung his headphones back around his neck, not on, just resting there, and shrugged the backpack onto his shoulder. Then he walked. No glance back, no reaction left behind. Just Holloway, standing there, watching that slender, upright figure disappear down the street. His brow furrowed. There was something about the moment that clung to him like humidity, something he couldn't shake. It wasn't because Elijah had done anything wrong. It wasn't the line about "my father's special ops," which Holloway had dismissed as childish bluffing. It was the way the kid had stood there, like every insult and mockery had bounced off a shell Holloway couldn't penetrate. That look, so calm, so controlled, it made him feel judged, like he was the one on trial. And that feeling, that sting of being dismissed, triggered something old and unresolved in Holloway. A memory of a younger version of himself, full of ambition, dreaming of making it into special forces, and failing, disqualified from training, not disciplined enough, not in control. Now here stood a 16-year-old black kid, calmly staring him down with the kind of restraint Holloway had never mastered. He's hiding something, or maybe his dad really is. The thought sent a chill crawling down Holloway's spine. He climbed back into his cruiser, flipped open his patrol laptop. Name, Julian Brooks. Address, 3821 Maple Street. Nothing flagged, no red alerts, no photos, no military affiliations, no online presence, no Facebook, no LinkedIn. Too clean, unnaturally clean. Meanwhile, Elijah had just gotten home. The house was small, painted a soft gray, with a white picket fence and a blooming bougainvillea trellis in the front yard. His mother, Nadine Brooks, had just come back from a hospital shift and was changing out of her scrubs. Elijah stepped through the front door and set his backpack down. "Something happened?" his mother called out. She didn't look at him, but her voice already carried tension. He almost said, "Nothing," like he usually did. But then he sighed. "I got stopped by a cop on my way home. A new guy. His name's Holloway." Nadine froze. She turned slowly. Her face had gone pale. "What did he do?" "He asked where I lived, emptied my backpack, took a jab about Dad." "What did you say?" "I just said, Dad's special forces." The air in the room shifted. Nadine stepped closer and took her son's hand in both of hers. "Elijah, I've told you, we don't talk about your father, not because we're ashamed, but because it's safer that way." Elijah looked at her. "I know, but the way he talked, I couldn't just stay quiet." Nadine pulled him into a hug. He was taller than her now, by a head, but in her arms he was still the boy she'd raised. "We'll talk to your father when he gets back. For now, stay steady. Don't let anyone push you out of who you are, you understand?" Elijah nodded, but in his eyes something had shifted. A line had been crossed. And though he was still trying to stay calm, Holloway, driven by pride and suspicion, had taken one step too far. A step into a world he didn't understand, and one he would never be able to control. Elijah stepped into the house, pulling the worn wooden door shut behind him. 3821 Maple Drive. There was nothing remarkable about it compared to the other homes in Fairhaven Grove. No wide yard, no double garage, no pool. But inside, it was the only world where Elijah felt safe. An old armchair sat in the corner, draped with a white cloth. Family photos lined the walls in neat rows. Little Elijah in his preschool uniform, his middle school graduation picture, a few snapshots of him and his mom at the beach, but none, absolutely none, of Julian Brooks in uniform. No medals, no framed service photos, no souvenirs of rank. It was as if the man existed only in the margins, present but always just out of focus. Elijah dropped his backpack beside the kitchen table, grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl. Every movement, familiar, repeated, comforting. But today something lingered behind his eyes. The sound of Holloway's laughter still echoed there. The lock clicked. The front door opened. Nadine Brooks stepped in, sharp-eyed and poised, the kind of woman who saw through excuses before they were spoken. She was still in her navy scrubs, white nursing shoes scuffed from long hours, hair tied back in her usual tight bun. "You're home?" she asked, slipping off her mask and setting her bag on the chair. Elijah nodded. "Everything's almost normal." She paused. That one word, almost, was enough. "Almost?" she repeated, locking eyes with her son. He hesitated. Part of him wanted to move on, to bury the moment, but her eyes, clear and unrelenting, told him the truth had no place to hide. "There was a cop. His name's Holloway. He stopped me on my way home." Nadine sat down immediately. The softness in her expression disappeared. "What did he say?" "He asked where I lived, why I was walking through the neighborhood, then made me open my bag." "Did anyone see?" "Yeah, some neighbors. Amira, too. She recorded everything." Nadine didn't say a word. She stood and reached for a glass of water, but her hand trembled slightly. She masked it with a turn of her back. "What else did he ask?" Her voice was low, steady. "He asked what Dad does," Elijah answered quietly. Nadine turned. Her eyes had darkened. "And what did you say?" Elijah swallowed. "I told him Dad was in special operations." Silence, tight and stretched like a string pulled to its limit. Nadine set the glass down on the table and sat, fingers weaving together in her lap. "You know we never say that to anyone, Elijah. Ever." "I know, but he said things I couldn't let go. That I didn't have a father. That black men always leave. I didn't want him thinking Dad walked out on me." Nadine exhaled, long and heavy, as if it carried years. She rose, crossed the room to the bookshelf, and reached behind a row of old paperbacks. From a hidden compartment, she pulled out a small black phone. No SIM, no contacts, no internet. It had one purpose. She powered it on, typed in a code, and sent a message. Midnight call. Pattern X3. Confirm. Seconds later, a reply flashed on screen. Acknowledged. Protocol 7 active. She erased the message, powered down the phone, and slid it back into its hiding place. Elijah stood still, watching everything. Mom, what's going on? Nadine turned to him, her expression softer now, but firm. From now on, if anyone asks what your father does, you say he's a government consultant. Nothing more, nothing less. And if they dig deeper, they will, she cut in, and we'll be ready. Elijah looked at her, and for the first time in his life, he saw her for who she truly was. Not just a nurse, she was the gatekeeper of their home, the one who heard danger first, whether it came through the stare of a cop or a midnight call that never came twice. Nadine gently squeezed his hand. Your father isn't just special ops, Elijah. He's the kind of man others are afraid of, which is exactly why we have to live like he doesn't exist. Elijah didn't speak. Inside something stirred, something familiar. Fear, yes, but beneath it, something else. Pride. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. Outside the window, the sunset bathed Maple Drive in gold. But inside 3821, an invisible door had just closed. And somewhere beyond it, a silent force had started watching again. The next morning, at the Fairhaven Grove Police Department, Officer Brent Holloway sat alone in his cramped office, eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. His desk was buried under piles of paperwork, and his computer screen glowed with overlapping browser tabs, residential databases, internal networks, military archives. One name typed over and over again, Julian Elijah Brooks. The search results came back blank. No criminal record, no social media, no images, no official job title. Holloway muttered, no way. A man in his 40s, a longtime resident of Fairhaven, married, father of a high school student, and not a single solid footprint online? Unbelievable. Even stranger, his military file was flagged. Restricted, clearance level, classified. That level of security wasn't assigned to just anyone, unless the man wasn't merely a soldier, unless he was something more. The more Holloway thought about it, the more unsettled he felt, challenged, dismissed, deceived, especially by that kid, Elijah Brooks, with those calm, unreadable eyes. Holloway stood abruptly, grabbed his jacket, and left the station. No report filed, no word to anyone. Saturday morning in Fairhaven Grove unfolded as peacefully as ever. Sunlight filtered through the golden red maple trees, casting a soft shimmer on the neat white fences that lined the streets like a postcard. But to Holloway, the light felt like paint, bright and pretty on the surface, masking something darker beneath. He drove slowly past the Brooks residence, eyes scanning for anything out of place. The door was shut, no car in the driveway. Stillness. He circled the block, turning onto a neighboring street. There, on a porch lined with worn wooden steps, sat Mrs. Martha Jenkins, 75, tending to a patch of blooming lavender. She was one of those people who knew everything about the neighborhood, not out of nosiness, but because she paid attention. Good morning, Mrs. Jenkins, Holloway said with a friendly smile, flashing his badge like a shield of purpose. She looked up, squinting under her sun hat. Patrol this early? Something wrong? Just routine checks, Holloway replied, then casually steered the conversation. How long have you lived here, ma'am? 38 years, Mrs. Jenkins said, watering her lavender with practiced care. Been here since this place was just dirt roads, not even a grocery store in sight. So I guess you know the family at 3821 Maple, the Brooks? She paused, her eyes drifting slightly before nodding. Oh, Nadine's a sweet woman. Works over at Mercy Hospital. And the boy, Elijah, polite as they come, always helps me shovel snow in the winter. And Mr. Brooks? Julian, she echoed, stopping again as if choosing her words carefully. He's not around much. Last I saw him was spring last year. My porch step had rotted out. He came over, fixed it in an afternoon. Didn't say much, just finished the work and disappeared. Disappeared? I mean, didn't see him for months after that. Then one morning there he was again, walking his dog, like nothing happened. Holloway took notes, every word sharpening the edges of his suspicion. Was he ever in uniform? Say anything about what he did for work? Number always in plain shirts spoke softly. Nadine never talked about him either. A life deliberately quiet. What do you think he does for a living? Mrs. Jenkins squinted at Holloway, lowered her voice. If I'm being honest, I think he works for the government. That man's eyes, sharp as a blade, like the kind of person who doesn't miss a single detail. On the drive back, Holloway couldn't shake it. His mind began stitching the pieces together. Elijah wasn't afraid during questioning, never blinked when he said his father was special forces. Nadine guarded information like it was classified. The neighbors only knew Julian as here and then not, like he lived on a hidden schedule. What Holloway felt wasn't just secrecy. It was something being purposefully concealed, and that was something he couldn't look away from. That night, Holloway sat alone in his small apartment. The glow of the computer screen lit his face, exhausted but still burning with resolve. He opened the Tor browser, navigating into the digital shadows, old forums where veterans used to gather. He posted anonymously, "Anyone ever heard of Julian Brooks? Suspicious background, extremely high-level clearance, used to live in Fairhaven, allegedly part of a special deployment unit. Investigating officer." 20 minutes later, a reply popped up. "If he's who I think he is, you're better off forgetting that name. Some people don't exist on paper, but they're present in all the places that matter." Ghost Watcher 77. Holloway read the message, lips pressed tight, but instead of backing off, his determination sharpened. One thought pulsed in his mind. If Julian Brooks really is special forces, then he's deceiving this entire town, and I'm going to be the one to expose him. He grabbed his phone and dialed an old contact, someone who worked deep in the military archives. "Mark, it's Brent. I need you to pull some info for me. Julian Brooks, special ops, high clearance. I know it's risky, but I need you to try." There was a pause, then Mark's voice came low and serious. "Brent, you're playing with fire." Holloway let out a dry chuckle. "I'm not afraid of fire, Mark. I just want to know who the hell he is." Night settled slowly over Fairhaven Grove. The houses shut their doors early, warm yellow light slipping through the cracks in drawn curtains. Streets emptied like they always did in the suburbs, except not tonight. A shadow moved between the trees, slipping past porch lights and security cameras with silent precision. Brent Holloway had planned this too well. He wore a dark jacket, fingerprint-free gloves, and a mask that covered half his face. Not for COVID, but to hide the fear pressing tight against his chest. It was time. The Brooks house sat completely dark. No lights, no movement. From a distance, Holloway scanned every angle, eyes sharp. He approached the wooden gate in the back. He'd memorized the latch from previous patrols. One twist, a gentle push. The gate creaked open. Holloway stepped into the backyard like a ghost. At the far end of the yard stood a small wooden shed, the kind used for gardening tools. But something about it had always nagged at him. The rusted padlock on the outside. Too easy, too staged. It didn't fit Nadine's meticulous style. He pulled out a small lockpick tool. A few seconds. Click. The wooden door opened with a whisper. A musty, damp smell rolled out. Inside, nothing unusual. Gardening tools, old boots, a wooden shelf stacked with boxes, paint cans and glass jars. But then his flashlight caught something, a gray dented metal box shoved into a shadowed corner high on the shelf, nearly hidden beneath a pile of clay pots. Holloway stepped onto a low stool, carefully removing one item at a time. The box had a small padlock. He smirked, pulling a pick from his pocket, but stopped. It wasn't locked, just latched. A trap. He hesitated and opened the lid anyway. Inside the box, a few foreign banknotes with unusual denominations. A small notebook, filled with tangled handwriting, looked encrypted. And at the very bottom, a photograph. Julian Brooks, standing in a field of yellow sand. He wore desert fatigues, no insignia, no rank, no unit name, only the eyes. Eyes that stared straight into the camera, as if they were looking through time, looking straight at whoever was holding the picture now. Holloway squinted. His pulse quickened. Something about this photo felt off. He pulled out his phone and snapped a few quick shots, then turned the photo slightly to get a better angle on Julian's face. And that's when he saw it. A flash, just a flicker, reflected by the flashlight beam. Something mounted near the ceiling. A camera. Tiny, almost invisible, unless the light hit it just right. Holloway froze. 3 blocks away, in a dark room with no lights, a man sat in silence watching his laptop screen. Thermal imaging, radio wave detection, night vision feeds. Everything was live. He didn't take his eyes off Holloway, who was now hunched over inside the shed. His gaze was sharp, trained, cold and clinical. In his ear, a secure comm unit buzzed softly. Confirming target has breached Tier 3 perimeter. No sign of retreat. Sending signal. Holloway has crossed the line. Another voice replied, calm and deep. It's time to elevate protocol. Activate soft response directive. Alert level 2. From this point on, all actions will be recorded. The man in the dark room didn't blink. His fingers tapped in a quiet command. A backup of surveillance footage began encrypting, then transmitted through a military-grade channel. Holloway had just stepped onto a stage he didn't even know had an audience. Back at the Brooks house, Holloway shut the lid of the box in a rush, fumbling to return everything exactly as it had been, or at least as close as he could manage. His breath was shallow, sweat beating under the mask. A strange sensation crept into his mind. I'm being watched. He turned. Nothing. Just the rustle of trees and the stillness of the surrounding homes. He stepped out of the shed and moved quickly across the backyard, unaware that every step was being tracked, every motion recorded. The back door to the Brooks house was slightly ajar, but Holloway didn't risk it. That's enough for tonight, he told himself, retreating down the alley toward his car parked 3 blocks away. He didn't know it yet, but a tracking device had been attached to the underside of his car long ago. Inside a dark office, no signage, no windows, no identifiers, a woman typed at a keyboard. On her screen, a live report. Holloway, Tier 3 breach, tracker active, status, active engagement, continue surveillance. She looked up toward a man standing silently by the window, dressed in a black shirt, watching the night. How far do you think he'll go? She asked. The man, no name necessary, replied quietly. As far as he thinks he's the hunter. But really, he's just the prey. That afternoon at the public basketball court near Fairhaven High, Elijah was mid-game with a few friends. He had just sunk a clean 3-pointer when the sharp screech of a police siren cut through the laughter. A familiar patrol car rolled up slowly to the edge of the court. The door swung open. Officer Brent Holloway stepped out, hostility plain in his eyes. Elijah Brooks, he called out, his voice slicing through the court like a blade. Elijah turned and looked at him, calm. Yes, sir? You're coming with me, Holloway said as he approached, one hand already resting on his cuffs. On what grounds, sir? Elijah asked, still holding the basketball, not resisting. Disturbance reported. Witnesses claim you were involved, Holloway replied, an accusation so vague it barely meant anything anymore. On what grounds, sir? Elijah asked, still holding the basketball, not resisting. Disturbance reported. Witnesses claim you were involved, Holloway replied, an accusation so vague it barely meant anything anymore. I've been here for over an hour, sir. My friends can vouch for that. One of Elijah's teammates spoke up. No need for explanations. Hands out, Holloway ordered coldly. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed under the midday sun. In the corner of the court, Amira Johnson stood silently with her phone raised, live streaming. Her face calm, her lens steady. She recorded every second. This is Elijah Brooks, student at Fairhaven High, being arrested without clear cause, she narrated in a quiet voice. This is Officer Holloway, the same one Elijah's mother filed a harassment complaint against last week. A crowd of students began to gather. Several stepped in front of Elijah, voicing their protest. He didn't do anything. We've been here the whole time. He was just playing ball. But Holloway didn't stop. Elijah didn't resist. He held his hands out quietly, his eyes still and deep like a lake holding back a storm, just as his father once taught him. At the Fairhaven Police Department, Nadine Brooks walked in like a storm wrapped in silk. Her hair was tied back, still in her navy scrubs, no time to change. But her eyes were cold, surgical. I need to see my son, Elijah Brooks. The desk officer looked up, startled, then quickly began typing to pull the file. The boy is being held for preliminary questioning. He's a minor, and I'm his mother. Call your superior. Now. Nadine's voice was sharp, unwavering. The atmosphere in the precinct tensed like a pulled wire. Then, footsteps echoed from the front door. Everyone turned. A tall, lean man walked in with quiet precision. No uniform, no gear, just a slim brown wallet in his hand. Julian Brooks. He didn't speak, just approached the front desk, pulled out a red card with a gold border, a military ID, the kind only held by operatives embedded deep in government silence. The officer behind the desk glanced at the card, eyes widening. He stood up so fast the chair squeaked behind him. Sir, please hold on just a moment. Within minutes, the precinct fell into a strange, almost reverent hush. Officers who had been joking and chatting now lowered their voices. A senior officer stepped out, froze when he saw Julian, and instinctively straightened his posture, like he'd once seen this man in a far more dangerous place. Mr. Brooks, we're currently reviewing protocol. Julian didn't respond, just said, I'm here for my son. No one stood in his way. Elijah was brought out. His eyes lit up the moment he saw his father. They didn't need words, just a single nod between them. Before leaving, Julian placed a folder gently on the station chief's desk. This is a formal request for an internal investigation into Officer Brent Holloway on charges of abuse of power, harassment of a minor, and unlawful entry. The chief opened his mouth to respond. Julian cut him off. Calm, level voice, absolute authority. Copies have already been sent to the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the Special Security Coordination Bureau. I expect a result within 72 hours. Julian Brooks didn't need to raise his voice. His silence in that red card was enough to make the entire precinct hold its breath. News of Elijah's arrest on the basketball court spread through Fairhaven Grove like wildfire. The video Amira Johnson had filmed was now shared thousands of times across social media, stirring a wave of outrage, solidarity, and suspicion. Conversations erupted everywhere, in bakeries, churches, school hallways, and basketball courts. One side stood firmly with the Brooks family. Those who knew Holloway's stare wasn't justice, it was bias. The other murmured their doubts. If his father's clean, why hide everything so tight? On Sunday morning, Carter's Cafe, usually quiet with the smell of cinnamon rolls and soft jazz, housed three old men at their usual table in the corner. Walter Dixon, 78, a retired history teacher. James Whitmore, 75, who delivered mail in Fairhaven for nearly 40 years, and Reverend Harold Carter, who had baptized, buried, and married nearly every soul in the Black community for the past half-century. The door opened. Julian Brooks stepped inside. No uniform, no agent swagger, just a father. And yet the entire room seemed to fall a degree colder. Walter gave a quiet nod. "Sit down, Julian. We need to talk." Julian said nothing. He sat, placed a folder on the table, opened his phone. On the screen, footage from his home security system. Officer Brent Holloway sneaking through the yard, hands deep in a shed that wasn't his, opening the steel box, staring at the photo. James exhaled, jaw tight. "He's pushing this too damn far." Reverend Carter placed a hand over his chest, eyes dim. "We thought we'd outlive this, Julian, but some things outlast prayer." Julian looked up, calm, firm. "I don't want a war. I've seen enough of them to know they only hurt the ones who don't deserve it. But I won't let my family stay in someone's crosshairs either." Walter leaned in, slow and serious. "What do you need from us?" Julian reached into his coat, pulled out 3 slips of paper, each with a name, an address. "I don't need you marching in the streets. I don't need slogans. I just need a network." He looked each man in the eye, voice calm but firm. "Older folks, the ones nobody notices. Gardeners, mailmen, barbers, the ones who sell produce every morning. I need eyes." James was the first to nod. "Our network used to keep families safe back in the day. We're not what we once were, but I can make some calls." Walter added quietly, "We'll watch Holloway. No interference, just observation. If he slips up again, we'll know." Reverend Carter let out a quiet chuckle. "Who are you really, Julian?" Julian's response was as steady as always. A husband, a father, and the guardian of what deserves peace. Before he left, Julian placed a copy of the footage on the table. He rose, nodded to the 3 men, not just in gratitude for today, but for the quiet years they'd spent defending justice in a town that didn't always know the word. At the small house on the far end of Cedar Street, Elijah stared out the window. He didn't know about the meeting at the cafe, but somehow deep down, he knew. He wasn't alone anymore. Across town, Brent Holloway, still bitter and obsessed, chased phantom leads through files that led nowhere. He didn't know. It was he who was now being watched, by the very people he had underestimated. Brent Holloway sat alone in his darkened apartment, the room cluttered with printouts, surveillance photos, and a computer screen glowing with illegally accessed files. In his mind, Julian Brooks wasn't just a father with a murky past. He was part of something deeper, an underground network, and Holloway was convinced that he alone saw the truth. They called him obsessed, a bigot, a suspended cop. But that only convinced him further. He was the only one doing what was right. "I'll expose him. This whole town will see who he really is," Holloway muttered to himself. 3 days after the incident at the station, Holloway had quietly assembled a team, 4 former colleagues now on leave or under disciplinary action. They met at midnight in an abandoned parking lot behind the town mart. "We go in quiet, no damage, no footprints," Holloway instructed. "We're looking for anything. A map, a badge, weapons, wiretaps, anything that proves he's hiding something." "This isn't a warranted search, Holloway," one man said, voice uneasy. "If we get caught, no one will know. And if we're right, we'll be heroes." Holloway cut him off. 1:32 a.m., 3821 Maple Street. The house was silent, lights off, not a single sign of movement inside. 4 men dressed in black, caps pulled low, crept silently across the backyard. Holloway led the way, carrying a professional-grade lock-picking kit. They moved to the back door. 20 seconds, and the lock clicked open. Inside, the house was eerily still. Everything was tidy, clean, nothing out of place. "Check the first floor. I'm going upstairs," Holloway whispered. He searched drawer by drawer, cabinet by cabinet. Letters, utility bills, family photos. Nothing military, nothing off. From downstairs, one of the officers called out, "Every room's like a model home. Feels like it's staged not to leave a trace." But then, in the shed out back, Holloway found a small wooden cabinet. On top, behind a stack of chipped clay pots, sat an old silver metal box, dust-covered and dented. Inside, a small notebook, handwritten in some sort of code. A few foreign banknotes in multiple currencies. In one photo, Julian Brooks standing in desert fatigues. No insignia, no rank, just his eyes, staring straight into the camera, straight through it, right at Holloway. "Jesus!" Holloway exhaled, pulling out his phone to snap pictures of everything. What he didn't know, 3 blocks away, someone else was already watching. 3:17 a.m. Holloway returned to his car. Each man climbed into his vehicle, keys in hand. But none of the engines started. "What the hell?" one of them muttered. "Everything was fine when we got here," another said, confused. Holloway flicked on a flashlight, ducking down to check under the car. Nothing was visibly damaged, but the electronics were dead. "This can't be," he muttered, gripping the steering wheel, pulse racing. "Who could have—" Then his phone rang. "Blocked number." "Holloway," he answered. A calm voice replied, "We saw everything." "Who are you?" "The man you've been trying to find." Silence. Then the voice continued. "Tonight's actions, illegal entry, armed trespass. You thought they wouldn't have consequences?" "You can't threaten me," Holloway snapped, but his voice shook. His hands, too. "I'm not threatening, I'm recording, and the time has come to settle the debt." The line went dead. Holloway stared at the phone, then at the others, each one pale, silent. At the same time, a secure office in Washington, D.C. On the screen, surveillance footage from the Brooks residence played in real time. A high-ranking Pentagon officer placed a steady hand on a secure line and picked up the receiver. "Transfer all intel to the Department of Justice. Code Blackbird has been activated. An operative is being illegally pursued. Protective protocols will be deployed immediately." 4 a.m. The Brooks residence. Julian Brooks stood silently in front of a surveillance monitor, freshly returned from a classified mission. No uniform, no weapons. But his eyes didn't belong to an ordinary man. Nadine stepped into the room, pouring coffee while replaying the footage. "How long do you think we'll be safe?" she asked. Julian didn't answer. He picked up his phone, dialed a code sequence. When the line connected, he spoke only 6 words. "Activate the order. Summon Blackbird. It's time to settle the debt." That afternoon, Elijah's phone buzzed as he sat at the dining table working through a math worksheet. A message from Amira. "Meet me at Crawford Park. Urgent. Don't tell anyone. It's important." Elijah frowned. That didn't sound like Amira, but worry crept in. Maybe something serious had happened. He stood up, typing quickly. "Okay, I'll be there in 10. He didn't know that just a few blocks away, Brent Holloway sat in an old gray car, watching. The burner phone on his dashboard still displayed the fake message thread. Julian Brooks was cleaning a firearm long out of active use, a quiet ritual to steady his mind. When a soft alert chimed from the device on his wrist, a blinking amber light. Elijah had left the safe zone. Location: Crawford Park. Julian shot to his feet. He scanned the perimeter cameras. No signs of a break-in. In the kitchen, Nadine was peeling apples, her eyes narrowing as Julian changed jackets and checked his GPS tracker. "Something happened?" she asked, not stopping. "Stay here. Lock every door after I leave." His voice, sharp, cold, controlled. She didn't ask again. She knew. The man she thought had left the battlefield was back. At the park, Elijah sat on a stone bench near the parking lot. No Amira, Just one man walking toward him, tall, hooded, cap pulled low. Too late to run. Elijah stood just as a hand like cold iron wrapped around his throat. "Don't move," Holloway growled. "Get in the truck." Elijah struggled, but it was no use. His arms were yanked back, knees buckling as he was shoved into the back seat of a nearby pickup. The door slammed shut. Holloway hit the ignition and peeled away from the park. In the back, Elijah's wrists were zip-tied, mouth taped, eyes wide, searching the streets, trying to memorize every turn. Julian swerved hard at the intersection, leading toward the abandoned industrial zone. The GPS tracker on Elijah's wrist was moving fast, heading east toward the old Vaughn Logistics warehouse, shut down years ago after the company went bankrupt. "Red flag," Julian muttered. "Good spot to avoid patrol routes. Too exposed for anyone with intel training." He parked the car 100 meters from the structure. No rush, no panic. Opening the trunk, Julian retrieved a lightweight tactical kit, flashlight, cable ties, a mini lockpick set, night vision goggles, and a syringe containing a paralytic, non-lethal, but strong enough to disable someone for hours. He moved toward the building, silent as a shadow. Inside the warehouse, it was pitch dark, save for shafts of weak amber light piercing through rusted gaps in the roof. Holloway tied Elijah to a chair, hands trembling with adrenaline. "Where's your daddy, huh?" he screamed. "Elite! Please, your dad's a ghost, a walking threat." Elijah stayed calm, even bound tight. His eyes, a mirror of Julian's, locked onto Holloway. No fear, no hate, just stillness. That silence drove Holloway insane. "What are you looking at? You think he's coming for you? I've cut comms. He won't even know where to start." He circled Elijah, knuckles whitening around the grip of his pistol. Julian slipped in through a side door, one step at a time, like a phantom. He'd guessed right, no security cameras. But the blind spots, he'd trained operatives to use them. Voices echoed from the main room. "You think you're special? I'm the one protecting this town." Julian flattened against the wall, pulling the syringe from his chest pocket. "Ready?" Holloway never heard the footsteps closing in behind him. Not until a hand clamped down on his gun arm, strong as steel. He spun around. Too late. Julian twisted his wrist. The gun clattered to the floor. Holloway collapsed, his limbs trembling, his nervous system failing, paralyzed and panicked. Calmly, Julian knelt beside Elijah, undoing the restraints. Elijah stood shakily, his eyes a whirlwind of fear and gratitude, a perfect mirror of his father. "You okay?" Julian asked, a steady hand resting on his son's shoulder. Elijah nodded. "Still breathing. Thanks to you." The two embraced briefly, father and son framed by shadows and rust, the stench of oil thick in the air. A place meant to bury dirty secrets, now reclaimed by quiet integrity. Then, the sound of sirens outside. Flashes of red and blue filtered through a shattered window pane. SWAT teams and federal agents stormed in. No shots fired, no orders barked. They knew exactly who was already inside. A man in a black suit stepped forward. He and Julian locked eyes. No introductions, no need. They nodded. Soldiers once, now shadows again. Meeting not on a battlefield, but still in service. Julian gestured toward Holloway, now curled on the concrete floor. "He kidnapped my son. Claimed it was the law, but he had no badge, no warrant, and no grasp of reason." The agent gave a sharp nod. "We'll take it from here." Julian turned to Elijah, squeezed his shoulder one last time. "Come on, son, let's go home." They walked out together, into a flood of lights and stunned silence. To those watching, Julian Brooks was no longer just a father. He was a ghost from the intelligence world, fully formed in the heart of the night. And this was only the beginning. Early morning sunlight filtered softly over the quiet streets of Fairhaven Grove. A black SUV rolled to a stop in front of the local police department. The door opened. Two federal agents stepped out, escorting Brent Holloway, handcuffed, head down, his face bruised from the previous night's encounter with Julian Brooks. Dozens of camera shutters clicked. A crowd had gathered, angry, confused, watching in stunned silence. "Wasn't he supposed to protect us?" someone murmured. A nearby reporter replied under their breath, "No." He was granted authority, but never earned the morality to wield it. Holloway faced a long list of federal charges: kidnapping a minor, illegal entry, impersonating law enforcement, abuse of power, violation of civil rights. The accusations piled up like stones, crushing whatever was left of his career and the illusion that he'd ever stood above this town. 3 days later, in the brightly lit Fairhaven Grove Town Hall, the stage bore a new mural, one that symbolized justice and unity. Julian Brooks stepped up to the podium. No uniform, no badges. Only the steady eyes of a father who'd once put his life on the line to protect his son. "What happened to my family," he began, voice low and calm, "wasn't unique." A hush fell across the room. The only difference this time was someone saw it, someone recorded it, and someone spoke up. Silence held. "I'm not here to demand revenge. I'm not asking for anyone to kneel, to bow, or to beg forgiveness. What I want, what I ask for, is change." His eyes scanned the room: town leaders, teachers, parents, the ones who had once avoided his family's gaze, and those who'd quietly conspired with silence. Change doesn't begin with words, it begins with action. At first, the applause was hesitant, scattered. Then it built and rose, until the hall echoed with the sound of hope breaking through shame. Tears slipped down the faces of some who had once turned their backs on the truth. Now they faced it, and for the first time in a long time, they believed it could be different. In the weeks that followed, change began to seep into the dry, hardened soil of Fairhaven Grove, quietly, steadily, and undeniably. The Fairhaven Grove Police Department underwent its most sweeping reform to date. Officers were required to complete retraining in racial bias awareness, crisis response, and community engagement. An independent oversight board, including local citizens, was formed to monitor conduct. At Fairhaven High, Elijah Brooks's story was added to the civics curriculum. Students discussed justice, personal rights, and social responsibility, not as abstract concepts, but as living, breathing truths rooted in their own community. And in the neighborhoods, things shifted. Suspicious glances gave way to simple, good morning greetings. Curtains once half drawn in silent surveillance now opened wide to let the light in. And Elijah, he became a living symbol for a new generation. Not because he was the son of a special operative, but because he held on to his dignity in the face of adversity. He didn't shout. He didn't retaliate. He stayed calm. Just as his father once taught him, be the quiet storm in a room full of wolves. At school, students, especially other kids of color, began to approach Elijah, to ask, to share, to seek his thoughts. He never claimed to be a leader. He simply listened and offered quiet, steady wisdom in return. "I don't want to be a hero," Elijah once told his mother. "I just want to be myself, without being afraid for it." Nadine held her son tightly. No longer haunted by the dread of midnight phone calls, she could finally return to her work, to her mission of healing. And Amira Johnson, the brave girl behind the phone camera, became known across the nation. Her video had spread like wildfire, not just in Fairhaven Grove, but across America. Major outlets, the Washington Post, the New York Times, picked it up. Talk shows invited her to speak. A prestigious university awarded her a journalism scholarship, citing her as a storyteller of truth. In a short speech at the awards ceremony, Amira stood tall and said, "I just did what my father, a civil rights attorney, always taught me: never look away. When you witness injustice, you have a responsibility to shine light on it, even if it's just with a phone." Late afternoon sunlight stretched across the polished floors of the newly opened Brooks Institute for Quiet Strength. Inside, a group of kids trained in martial arts practiced survival drills and listened attentively to lessons about ethics, emotional discipline, and quiet resilience. None of them truly knew the past of the man guiding them, but to them he was a teacher, a symbol of what it meant to stand for what was right. In Julian's office on his desk lay an old newspaper. The headline read, "Elijah Brooks, From Silence to Symbol." He smiled softly, setting it beside a framed photo of their family, taken during the first dinner they'd shared after the storm had passed. Nadine stepped in, 2 mugs of hot tea in hand. "The town's changing," she said, handing him a cup. "You see it, don't you?" Julian nodded. The cold edge in his eyes had softened, replaced by a quiet relief. Still, he said calmly, "We have to keep watch until what's right stops being rare." A few months after the storm, Fairhaven Grove looked like a different town. The grass seemed greener, the sunlight softer, and the people, though still cautious, had begun learning how to smile at one another again. On the southern edge of town, a new training center had quietly opened its doors. A handcrafted wooden sign stood outside, simple yet unwavering. "Brooks Institute for Quiet Strength." Julian didn't advertise. He never took in more students than he could teach by name. But every afternoon a line would form. Teens of every color, every background, coming to learn not just how to defend themselves, but how to breathe, how to remain centered, how to stand calm in the middle of chaos. Some of the faces once watched the Brooks family with suspicion. Some had even whispered that Elijah was a walking threat. Now, those same people brought their children here, quietly, no excuses, no explanations, just an unspoken acknowledgement that they'd been wrong. And Brent Holloway, the former officer who once wore his badge like armor for hatred and fear, the court declared him unfit for trial, diagnosed with severe delusional paranoia. He was transferred to a high-security facility for dangerous individuals who could not be tried under normal law. During his final evaluations, when asked why he'd done it, he only repeated one thing: "He's not normal. He's a ghost." It didn't scare anyone. It only made them pity him. One quiet weekend night, as the town slept, Julian Brooks sat in his office behind the training center when his secure phone gave a soft buzz. An unknown number lit up the screen. He opened the message. "If you ever need us, we're still watching." That's what family does. No name, no encryption. But Julian knew exactly who it was. He powered off the device, tucked it back into the safe, and walked toward the warm light of the home behind him. Elijah Brooks, now nearly as tall as his father, his dark skin glowing under the streetlights, stood alone on a quiet basketball court. He dribbled, shot. The ball bounced off the backboard, came back. He caught it, pivoted, launched again. Swish, clean. The sound of a stereotype shattering. From across the street, Mrs. Vaughn opened her window. She didn't close the curtain. Instead, she nodded softly toward him. Mr. Peterson, the grocer, passed by on his evening walk. He raised a hand. "Evening, Elijah." A group of teens jogged past, calling out, "Brooks, come early tomorrow. I need help with the breathing drills." Elijah smiled. No performance, no pride, just quiet certainty. The kind that comes when you no longer need anyone's permission to be yourself. He was no longer that black kid walking alone. No longer a potential threat. Elijah Brooks was a symbol, a boy who held his dignity in a storm, a young man born in shadow who learned how to shine without disturbing the peace.